Hey everyone, welcome back to Wild Sonic Farms, and today we're going to be getting into a new video. And before we get into the video, please go on and click the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Let's go on and get into the video. Now the next topic, I kind of want to focus a little bit on some new beekeepers. We may have new beekeepers in the chat. I'm not really sure. I know we have a lot of experienced beekeepers, but I just kind of wanted to ask you if you have any tips or anything that any advice that you'd like, if you could give to any new beginner beekeepers who are getting into beekeeping. What would be some advice that you would tell them?
Yeah, I always tell new beekeepers, and beekeepers call me all the time and want to get into the hive. And sometimes they saw the Flow Hive advertisement or read it in a magazine, and they think beekeeping is just going to be buying this hive and turning the crank, and honey's going to come into your jars. As soon as they start talking about the Flow Hive, I can pretty quickly realize they're just wanting this to be easy and get honey. So I usually go into beekeeping is a little bit more like farming than gardening. So to kind of get their mindset into taking care of animals. And then I need to kind of talk to them about, it's not as simple as just putting bees in a box and watching them grow. You have to manage them like you would a horse or chickens or anything like that. And you have, it's not that you can't leave them be for a little while, but you can't just set it and forget it. So I try to get that mindset into a new beekeeper that doesn't have hives yet. And once they're committed to getting hives, I'm like, great. You can't start with less than 2 is my default answer. I'm like, if you start with less than 2 hives, you're going to isolate problems. You're not going to be able to isolate problems that are right in front of your face. And Grace, I don't know if you ever had this situation when you were just down to a couple of hives, but you look at one hive and you look at the other and you go, wow, something's just not right with that one over there. It just doesn't look like that one. And if you've only got one hive, you don't have anything to compare it against. You can blame it on anything. You can blame it on the weather. You can blame it on your queen. You can blame it on anything. But if there's a hive right next to it that looks really good and a hive, that's dying right next to it, you can sort of objectively say, I've got a problem. And I think that is very, very important for a new beekeeper. And additionally, once you have 2 hives, you get the benefit of sharing resources, equalization. You can steal a frame of brood. You can steal some eggs. You can kind of keep another hive going. So 2 hives is a critical strategic important thing for a new beekeeper, but it does also double the hardware expense and things like that, and the space perhaps they didn't initially think of putting the beehive right next to their bird bath and their small little garden out in the front yard. I'm like, okay, well, if that's what you're thinking about, maybe this isn't what you should be doing anyway. These kind of need to be out here where you're going to walk back and see them a little bit later. And then the last thing I talk about once beekeepers kind of get a little bit more experience, this is kind of year 2, year 3, year 4 kind of a time frame, is like I mentioned earlier, you got to plan on your backup resources, and you need a backup for every single hive. That's my rule. You could do with a little bit less, you could do with a 40% backup, but the number one thing young beekeepers come to me for is emergency queens. Oh, my queen died. And then of course they go online and nobody's still selling queens when they need one. And not having a queen when you need it, and too late to raise their own, like right now, if you were to try to raise a queen right now, you're kind of done for the season. But if you had a 3-frame nuke or a 5-frame nuke sitting over there, you could do that, introduction, and that could be your strongest hive next year just because you were ready for it. Now, granted, a brand new year 1 beekeeper is not probably going to be ready to have that 3- and 5-frame nuke for every single hive, but I do like to set the mindset for new beekeepers that having those little nucleus boxes ready to do a split in the spring, and to plan on keeping them there and going by themselves is important. And you know what? Okay, let the 5 frame nukes swarm. That's fine. You're still going to have bees there. You don't need to necessarily worry about all of that. So those are the things I think I've learned to talk to new beekeepers about, is get them in the right mindset. It's more farming than gardening. Make sure they understand the numbers of hives you're going to need. Probably talk about the flow hive as their first hive, because it glorifies what beekeeping is before they're ready for it, in my mind. I had a flow hive. I don't use it anymore because it was too finicky, and my equipment doesn't match. But I tried it and I learned about it, and I now see the attraction why people reading in a magazine and thinking about getting into beekeeping, that would be how they would want to start. But I think it is also setting people up for failure, because when you put a box of brood underneath that big old flow frame on the top, the last thing you want to do is pull that flow frame off the top to get in the deep box below to check for varroa mites. It's just, you kind of setting a hive up to never get into and inspect it. And that leads to failure pretty quickly. So anyway, that probably answered your question a little bit longer than you thought.